Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tiina Kontinen. I come from the University of Jyväskylä, that was already mentioned a couple of times in the presentation. I'm currently a professor in international development cooperation there and also director of this master's program development. Nowadays, development education and international cooperation, but kind of continuing with the tradition of the previous program. Thank you so much, Ulla-Maija Kalle, for this nice kind of historical presentation of the development studies and development research in Finland. And now we have a pleasure to continue the discussion about maybe not so much about the history, but the current states and maybe some ideas for the future of development research and development studies, whatever we want to call it. From different perspectives. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers to invite me to chair this panel. It's a privilege to be here and discuss with you. The title of the panel is The State of Development Research, Critical Perspectives from Finland, Europe and the Global South. So the idea, I think, is to kind of discuss the development studies from a little bit different perspective, even if we all know that they are kind of intertwined. So in the panel, the Finnish perspective somehow is represented by Anja Nygren, professor in global development studies here at the University of Helsinki. And then we go a little bit, would we say it's scalar politics or levels, so a little bit more regional levels, so Nordic perspective is represented by Eleanor, who is professor of international development and head of research in Nordic Africa Institute, and kind of bringing that perspective to the discussion. Then we have Alfredo Saad-Filho, who's a professor in Queen's University in Belfast. And he's joining us online, so welcome, Alfredo. And in this panel, he is also representing the kind of European way of because he's a vice chair of the European Association of Development Research and Training Institute, EADI, at the moment. And then last but not least, we have David Barkin, distinguished professor from the Universidad, Autónoma, Metropolitana, Xochimilco, Mexico. And you have now the kind of beauty of representing the global South, so quite a big responsibility, but I'm sure that we all can discuss about it. Anyhow, the panel is here discussing now much more about the development research and development studies. We have discussed the multipolarity of the current world. We have discussed globalization and deglobalization yesterday. And today we kind of honor the 40 years of the Association for Development Research in Finland to discuss and focusing on the development studies and development research. I have kind of structured the questions around some of the discussions we had recently in the European Journal of Development Research that was published last year. That was edited by British Behuria and Andy Summer. And in their introduction, they kind of identify 3 different discussions we currently have about the present state and the future of development research in Europe especially. And the perspectives are framing, so how we frame what we mean by development, universality, so whether development studies is something that covers so-called global South or kind of more universal processes, and decolonization. So to put it in a simple word, the questions that, okay, in development research and development studies, what are we studying when we study development? Where are we studying it? And how are we studying development? And we will discuss these 3 questions with the panel, and then a little bit about the theme of the conference, and especially the hope part of the theme of the conference. All right, let's start with the first discussion about framings of development and studying what. And in the beginning of your contribution, you can tell a little bit about your own focus in development research and development studies before you go to your kind of perspectives. So I would like to now kind of giving the privilege to Finland, because we are celebrating our anniversary here. So I would like to invite Anja to start, please.
Good morning for everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I first want to thank Anja and Ulla for very interesting the presentation of the history of TDS. There are many struggles and challenges, so I somehow felt that in fact we came for a ready-made table to work. I'm Anja Nygren from the Professor of Global Development Studies. I mostly work myself in Latin America and political policies. But I want to emphasize here that we have had about this issue, we have had many discussions within our discipline, with my colleagues, with doctoral researchers, with students at all levels. So I think it's very important to have those common discussions. We have a very vivid community here at the University of Helsinki and Finland of global development researchers. And we have interesting forms of collaboration, but we also feel many concerns and challenges. Development research here at the University of Helsinki, here in Finland, is a diverse field of research, containing multiple perspectives, theoretical approaches, and schools of thought. What is common is criticism of conventional or so-called mainstream ideas of development that reflect global north ideas of modernity and perpetuate inequality and vulnerability. Some of us are studying development policies, others by the issues of global political economy, others questions of environmental development indexes, so key issues of political ecology. Just to mention a few areas where we are quite strong. Some of us are focusing more on so-called basic research. Others are promoting research activism and looking for alternatives to development or alternative developments. In my view, we need diversity of perspectives. Although it's not wise to let all the flowers grow wherever they want, and although we need to make choices and priorities, we need to respect and cultivate plurality of approaches to complicated issues of development research. Different viewpoints and controversies, they are key issues in academic research, in fact. Otherwise, there could be no academic discussions and debates. But you always need to water down your arguments. So, in my view, differences and disagreements are not bad. Internal tensions and divides are. What I have for years emphasized, and I still want to emphasize here, is the importance of analytical skills and methodological creativity, but also rigidity. We need to provide for our students and develop also in our own research. So Just a few words about this focus. I think we have a focus on the global south, main focus on the global south here in Finland. But considering that there are many global souths in the global north and many global north in the global south. So we need to understand the causes and consequences of global megatrends, but at the same time acknowledge the relevance of global south as an analytical category of countries and places with a shared history and contemporary meaning in the global hierarchy. Majority cautions against flattening global south scholarship as universalism, but also as categorically anti-universalism. It's important to highlight similarities and commonalities, but also huge diversity and differences among and within global south situations. And for this reason, I also often emphasize that we need long-term empirical research and good knowledge of all aspects of our research science. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Anja. And if I understood right, the development research in Finland is plural. So there are more transformative idea of development, more maybe mainstream and everything in between. Yeah, if I understood right. Wonderful. All right, then Eleanor, please.
Thank you very much, Tiina. I'm Eleanor Fisher. I'm Professor of International Development at the Head of Research at the Nordic Africa Institute. I've spent 30 years working within development studies in the United Kingdom before coming to the Nordic Africa Institute, which is over the sea and border in Sweden. And I thought as an entry point, it's actually quite useful just to give a little bit of explanation of the Institute, having had this lovely framing of the Finnish context historically, and I promise I won't get too historical. But the Institute was set up in 1962 by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and it's today funded by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. So we're a public agency, and we're conducting research that fits within a sort of traditional view of development research in terms of being a social science discipline that is problem-oriented, multi-interdisciplinary, normative, and applied to research in specific parts of the world, and also with an emphasis on field-based studies in our context, Africa, the African continent. I'm here with my colleague Lisa Lapsa, and also with scholars. Please raise your hands who have come from Nigerian institutions, Ugandan and South Africa. I'm very pleased to be with you here today. So it strikes me that the Nordic Africa Institute is very interesting as a weather vane of an institute which on the one hand is doing independent academic research within the development African studies field, but on the other hand is very much policy facing and needs to continue to maintain its relevance. And speaking personally, what I could observe that okay, we have a strong history within foreign policy, but also within development studies in Sweden of foundations of overseas development assistance being international solidarity, respect for partner sovereignty, the goal of poverty alleviation, which is still articulated today. And of course, underlying this, the tenets of liberal democracy, rules-based international order, respect for multilateralism, international law, the promotion of human rights, political equality, support for humanitarianism and civil society organisations. But speaking personally, my observation as somebody who regularly is interfacing with Nordic ministries of foreign affairs and also diplomats, Nordic diplomats around the continent, and African diplomats in the Nordics. In terms of development, I have a sense of an elephant that was tiptoeing around and knows it's there, and the framings that one is using, whatever the subject matter, are coming from development assumptions. But sometimes it's something one doesn't want to mention. It's most constructive not to mention today. And I think this is an interesting shift. Of course, the drivers for this in terms of development research coming very much to the question, what we see in the Swedish context, and I don't think this is so dissimilar from other parts of the Nordics, including Finland, is that development research is becoming more diversified. Sweden, our Association for Development Research, conducted a survey, and this was one of the findings, that it's becoming development-related research, incorporating disciplines from health, STEM, innovation, defence, security studies. Researchers wouldn't be in this room today, in actual fact. And the driver for this is funding. We've had dramatic decrease in research and development funding. I think a figure that I saw was a decrease of 73% over the last 5 years. And also a second driver is contemporary challenges to foreign policy norms that are reshaping the environment, expectations, values of funding. And in Sweden, for those of you who don't know, there's been a shift very much to the right. And this current government is explicit that development assistance is a foreign policy tool to protect Swedish interests. Now, one could argue that that has been the case for a very long time, maybe, but that is explicitly within policy nowadays. So coming back to the question of development research, we see how the meaning of development is becoming more pluralised. In terms of how we embrace social, economic, political and technological change that leads to better lives. And you've got a far wider range of actors and influences. If I want to be positive and optimistic, maybe this opens the way for more diverse views and experiences of change, and giving people support for their power to choose. Maybe not, but I'm trying to be optimistic. In terms of the future and some of the points that Anja was making, I can see there are overlaps in terms of what I want to see from development studies as a research leader and research manager, supporting researchers, postdoctoral researchers, PhD researchers, scholars coming to our institute. I want to see centre the location of power for development research, African studies in our context within the African continent. I want to see that it's transformative, that it recognises the diversity of experiences, it tends to the perspectives of marginalised people and situates the contextual knowledge and understandings, engages youth voices, very importantly, and enables researchers and those they are working with to develop tools and methodologies relevant to the context in which they're working, also acknowledging positionality. And last but not least, attends to academic freedom. And I mention that particularly today because I know that we have virtual presentations from the African continent. And I know of at least one presenter who isn't presenting what they want to talk about and is giving a different presentation because of issues of academic freedom. And that's within this conference today. So I think I haven't heard much mention of academic freedom, and I wanted to mention that. So this is the future, but it's also the present. And these are standard, I think, areas for development studies that I want to see continue. Tiina.
Wonderful, thank you. Maybe one question for everyone to think, for the open discussion is then, with all this multi-diversity and, different kind of ideas, what is then the kind of joint factor that defines development research and not something else, some other field? Anyhow, Alfredo, now I would like to unmute yourself and then put on the EADI hat and give a little bit about your reflections about where the development research in Europe is at the moment. And please start with introducing yourself and your field of research.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, I am one of the vice presidents of the European Association of Development Research and Training Institutes, and I'm based at Queen's University in Belfast in the UK.
Yeah, I know.
Let me start by thanking all colleagues, especially Bon, for this very kind invitation. I'm sorry I cannot be there with you. Now, we're suffering tremendous pressure in our field at different levels. First, there's a resourcing issue. Of course, this is not because of what the media and the political right call development fatigue, suggesting that voters believe that aid money is wasted because poor countries never actually get less poor. No, we have said for a long time that OECD aid is self-serving, the numbers are exaggerated, the projects are incoherent, the outcomes are cancelled out by the contractionary policies imposed by the international financial institutions and so on. On top of this, aid budgets have been cut over and over again. After the North Atlantic financial crisis of 2007, aid money was shifted to save Western banks. After the COVID pandemic, it was shifted to save employment in the global north. Now it's shifting into military spending, from tractors and water pumps into drones and tanks. At least now Western priorities are very clear. With all this, the UN target of 0.7% of GDP has been effectively abandoned, and those pressures are going to worsen. They will worsen because the far right is growing in most advanced economies. Then they are pushing the mainstream to the right. So both of them now want to cut aid, research, education, and so on in order to offer tax cuts to the rich, to subsidize large companies, and to finance the military. The pressures will worsen because economic growth in the West has been slowing down since the 1960s. And we are now in the middle of a great stagnation. And the lower the economic growth rate is, the more reluctant governments will be to fund development. They will worsen because with cuts, universities cannot function well, and they cannot fund scholarships for the global South. They will worsen because of the macroeconomic challenges across the South. The IMF now recognizes between 50 and 60 countries in debt distress. And with aid cuts, there will be less jobs in the field, so less students will come and less research will be funded. Those constraints are there, and they are compounded by geopolitical pressures from the US and the EU, in particular, fighting for old colonial privileges. Take that famous anecdote that's always attributed to some Kenyan government official that says every time that China visits our country, we get a hospital, but every time a Western government visits, we get a lecture. So they used to come with money and pressure, for which hired consultants and compliant academics were helpful, but they ran out of money. So now it's more and more about just coercion. For the last 40 years, the West has imposed macroeconomic policies that create what I have called stabilization, speculation, stagnation traps. And those traps have consumed many countries across the South. They are now consuming the North too. Think Japan, Italy, Germany, the UK, and so on. Let's think about the notion of historical retribution. But the anecdote that I mentioned, that's also about arrogance, the colonial, racist arrogance of Western governments, banks, businesses, journalists, many NGOs. That's just staggering. In the field. You're immediately stunned by their sense of entitlement, disconnect from reality, and willful ignorance of the history of Western intervention, enslavement, wars, settler colonialism, and genocide. And there's a complete failure of the West to offer examples of growth, sustainability, equality, sharing, solidarity, and recognition of those human rights that they proclaim very selectively, but often never practiced at home, and even less today. Instead, the West has created the world that is collapsing with wars, climate change, health crises, and so on. And if the privileged think that their wealth will protect them forever, or that they'll get a lift to Mars in a big rocket made by Elon Musk. I think there's a surprise that will be coming for them. The trouble is that before the surprise gets to them, it will have consumed a large part of humanity. Before that happens, we can and we must do our best to shift the world into a path of economic and political democracy, of solidarity and of sustainability. And development studies and development research, they have a role to play in this. Our disciplines must be critical, especially in times of crises, or they will end up justifying the status quo, exploitation, the reproduction of inequality, the rise of fascism, and the destruction of the conditions of life on earth. We are facing today a neoliberal modality of capitalism that has a residual prosperity that depends increasingly on outright plunder, extraction, and fraud, and that has destroyed the prospects of the next generation and perhaps the generations coming after them. It is then urgent to advance a transformative agenda, focusing on the restoration of democracy, the expansion of citizenship and universal rights, focusing on the distribution of income, wealth, and power, focusing on the decommodification and definancialization of social reproduction, starting with universal public services, and focusing on a green transition for the economy. And this policy work brings forward the strengths of the social sciences in general and development studies in particular. We recognize that it is impossible in the time that is available to our species, because of the remaining carbon budget available, it's impossible to achieve a green transition under a financialized neoliberalism. We focus on distribution, democracy, fiscal space, and public institutions. The mainstream focuses on protecting the rich and those who are already privileged. They have failed. They will continue to fail. The difficulty is that alternatives can emerge only with new social movements and new structures of representation, political parties, trade unions, community associations, corresponding to the current mode of existence of a society that has been very extensively decomposed domestically, that has been imperfectly integrated globally, that has distinct cultures, but that is connected by internet-based tools. We can see important successes, but we are not there yet. I think there is nothing more important right now than to build those movements to reshape the mode of existence of our societies in poor countries and in rich countries too. And for this, development studies and development research have a very important role to play by circulating ideas, circulating experiences, and inspiring progressive movements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alfredo. And maybe again, one question to note is about the kind of connection between social movements and development research and the kind of different manifestations it can take for the later discussion. I would now like to invite David to reflect about the development research in the Global South. Obviously, you can take your own perspective and explain what part of the Global South you would like to reflect on. So please.
Wow. Years ago, I had the fortune of being part of an effort to create an interdisciplinary center for research in Mexico called the Eco Development Center, based upon the notion that economics and in fact the social sciences themselves weren't adequate to look at the problems of the globe. We worked for 50 years. I'm sorry, we worked for 20 years. And then the neoliberal tiger emerged in the form of the North American Free Trade Agreement. The president of our country, Mexico, was committed to integration with the tigers of the North, the United States. And he destroyed our center because we questioned whether global integration was the form to bring welfare, well-being, and environmental balance to the world. What happened in my personal experience with the Eco Development Center was reproduced all over the world. And it became an extraordinary experience in the unraveling of institutional support for the notion that social sciences could not operate independently of natural sciences. Neoliberalism not only killed the Eco Development Center of Mexico, neoliberalism is killing millions of people around the world. And it poses the question, I celebrate that you're celebrating 40 years of your local that's National Organization of Development Studies here. But I would ask you, what does development studies mean here in Finland, in the Nordic countries, in the University of Helsinki? The word research has been mentioned by all of the three speakers who preceded me. Research means going and getting information from informants. Often the question of harvesting information is a process by which you use local people to get more information about what is happening. But that process, which has been very, very carefully developed and with a great deal of skill, has been harvesting information which has been carefully used to separate communities, to unravel social organization, and in fact to destroy the environment. Some of the major tendencies in today's world are land grabbing, monocultures, and we're told that there is a major problem of food production around the world. And that the answer to food production inadequacies is industrial agriculture. And yet the largest social organization in the world argues that what has to be done is to unravel industrial agriculture. The largest social organization in the world is called La Via Campesina. It has, at the present time, 220 million members in 82 countries, committed to agroecology, committed to food self-sufficiency on a local basis, not on a national basis, to avoiding agricultural science as it's presently practiced. La Via Campesina should be an organization which should be at the forefront of development studies. And yet, yesterday, I didn't hear anyone mention the notion of decentralized individual community production and the transformation, the enrichment, and the deepening of agroecology. Perhaps I missed a few talks where someone of you may have mentioned it. But it presents the problem, it presents the question of what is development. Alfredo just mentioned the notions of the change in policies that are developing in his island nation. Eleanor talked about the conservative trend of putting development at the service of foreign policy. I ask you the question, who are going to be the actors that are going to promote what in this conference is understood as development? A conference is called Development Days rather than Development Centuries. I ask you the question, is there any nation state that is presently contributing to assuring the welfare, the improvement of the well-being, and the realization of the human potential, while not destroying the natural conditions of life on Earth? I ask you the question, is well-being consistent with improvement of well-being, consistent with not destroying the Earth, the planet? I ask you the question, in this year, 2026, why are there more poor people in almost every country in the world than there were 20 years ago? There are notable exceptions, and we can talk about those exceptions. But I was invited as a voice for the Global South. The Global South that I have dedicated my life to in the past 70 years. The Global South that I have developed relationships with and collaborate with are not nation states. They are not organizations that in the name of development have impoverished billions. And one of the concepts that in my experience in the global south that is perhaps most productive in contributing to the welfare of people is a concept that is not in the textbooks of development studies. The concept that I'm talking about is cosmovisions, world visions, that are based upon a millenary inheritance of an understanding of the relationship between society and the planet. Cosmovisions. I could talk about it in English as perhaps world visions, but it doesn't work that way. In Latin languages, cosmovisions means a relationship between ways of thinking, ways of belief, the relationships between people and the planet. But it's not the relationship between people and the planet. It is a different vision that is absent from most development texts. And that is that people are part of the planet. People are part of nature, rather than nature being a source of resources. And we're concerned in the development text, yes, I probably have exceeded my time, and we're concerned about whether those resources are inexhaustible, especially in the atmosphere. And so I want to end this initial introduction by presenting you with an organization and with peoples around the world who are deliberately and with knowledge and forethought to use an expression of the English language explicitly asking the question, how can we live on the margins of globalization? How can we exist and create the new worlds that are so necessary to create a better planet? And I'm talking about the thousands of communities around the world that occupy 1/3 of the planet's surface and are generally absent from development studies. The 1/3 of the planet's surface that are organized in a consortium that is called Territories of Life, which most of you have not heard of. I invite you to investigate what are territories of life, who lives in these territories of life. And I give you a textbook that you can consult tomorrow. 350 pages of beautiful text, pictures, and something like 25 or 50 pages of bibliography in small type, which is available on the internet free, called Territories of Life. You just put it in Google. And you can find it in English and Spanish. It will soon be available first. Territories of Life is planting is sowing the seeds of what I consider, of what the team that I collaborate with have called post-capitalist society. One of the extraordinary things that is very, very significant in our research and our interactions with progressive people around the world is that Marx himself, in his last years, his last 4 years of life, Marx, that guy whose first name is Karl Marx, wrote his notebooks during his last 4 years of life about the fact that the revolutionary changes in the world will probably not come from a proletarian revolution, but rather from the contributions of building new worlds, revolutionary new worlds, in communal organizations that have a millenarian tradition. I won't go further into that. Anyone who's interested, my presentation yesterday in PowerPoint is available in this document.
Okay.
And so I urge you to find out more about what are these territories of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the powerful contribution and also questions for the audience and the recommendation to get to know the territories of life. For the information of audience, the kind of structure of the discussion after these initial introductions is that I'm going to discuss these two other aspects with some of the panelists, and then I'm going to give them a chance also to comment and maybe ask questions from each others, and then we will have comments from Professor Barry Gills, and then we will open the discussion. So I'm trying to look at that we will have at least like 20 minutes for the final discussion, because it would be really brilliant to have also views from the floor. But let's go to the second question, which I think most of you somehow already touched upon, the kind of the question of where do we do development studies, and one of these kind of debates in the EADI, for example, has been that is development studies something that is defined, or development research something that's defined by engaging with the so-called global south, or is it something that kind of is universally applicable? So for this question, I would first like to maybe invite Eleanor to reflect, and then after that, David, if you can continue from there, maybe a little bit shorter way.
Thank you very much, Tiina. I think I'll answer very briefly and superficially in terms of, I think part of your question is about a binary between the global south and the global north. I think as a general principle myself, I think development can be universal in different places, and also Annie was making the point about different global south and different global north, and I agree. As inequality, which the concept of global south was bringing to the fore, will be in different locations. I'm also a pragmatist, and on the one hand, I have different feelings about it. On the one hand, this binary, which was created, I believe, if I remember from my teaching of years ago, by Brandt flying around the globe at the beginning of the 1980s between the global north and south, seems from a time gone by in terms of, if we're talking about different coalitions of interest and groupings today, so-called multipolar worlds, whatever term you want to use. On the other hand, I also feel pragmatically, if it's useful still, let's use it. And I've noticed in this conference, knowing this matter might come up, it's been used a lot. Yeah. sometimes preceded by so-called global south. And I was also thinking this morning, where have I heard it used outside academia within the last couple of weeks? One was on the AI conference in India, and it was talking about global governance and the global south relating to global governance. The other is in my field, working on climate adaptation and talking about finance for adaptation in the global south. So if it has utility, let's use it. It seems that within this room it is being used a lot and continues to be a lot. So that's I'm sure David has very different views.
Okay, thank you. David, what do you think? Is this kind of binary between global south and north useful? And if yes, why? And if not, why?
The concepts of the global south and the global north are in fact products of the process of global integration, which is called globalization. And it's a continuation of the notion of colonialism, writ large. Conditions in the global south in general, in terms of environment, in terms of the well-being, have proliferated extraordinary human suffering on a massive scale. The struggles for resources, the struggles for control of people, the struggle for organizing populations at the service of capital is what is now the process of the integration of the global south into the global economy and the global society. Right now, the territories of life that I talked about exist in both the north and the south. But in the north, many of these societies have fewer options than in the south. Perhaps because the governments in the north are more capable of repressing them, of limiting them, of holding them accountable for so-called treaties, as in the case of Canada or in the case of the United States and New Zealand. The notion of the global south and the global north at this present time, and I'll just leave it there, suggests that countries in these two worlds, which are ironically defined by a European idea of the way in which the global map should be drawn. I'm not going to go into the details of the history of the way in which that map evolved since the 17th century. But in fact, the global map suggests, the dominant global map suggests that the north is bigger than the south, whereas the land areas in the south, of course, are much greater than in the north. But that's a history for geographers to explain. The populations in the global south are also larger than in the North. And the suffering in the South is much greater than in the North. But I will end by saying the options of the extraordinary varieties, the extraordinary wealth of cosmovisions in the South is so much greater, so much richer than what exists in the North and is not particularly appreciated. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we continue with Anja and Alfredo with the third question of how we should do development research. And this is, of course, kind of related to the question of decolonizing development research that has been very pertinent in present years. So, Anja, would you like to start with your reflections of how?
This is a very difficult question, but I think we need to recognize the colonial history of our discipline and also the current neocolonial tendencies which are gaining new power in this volatile and turbulent world. When I came to development studies 2009, we still had the name for our discipline. It was called Studies of Development Countries, like kehitysmaatutkimus. Although our students were well aware of all the discussions of developing countries, underdevelopment, maldevelopment, third world, global south, and so on, we decided to change our name for Global Development Studies for the long legacies of Eurocentrism and colonialism of the earlier term. Is decolonial going to be, or decolonization going to be a new paradigm? I hope not. For the reason that when something gets as a paradigm, it gets so institutionalized and mainstreamed that it loses its creativity. But I think it's a perspective that needs to be baked within all research in one way or another. I'm participating as a panelist. This is my fourth year in an international foundation or agency that gives funding for development research. And every year we make decisions of 35 million euros. In that panel, we have many discussions. What does decolonial mean? And should it be in all the proposals, or what do we require? I think it cannot be just a matter of what Roptel said yesterday, of ticking some boxes. It has to be, need to have an analytical understanding of it, new questions to be asked and new angles to be found. In my view, it's important that we have knowledge of Southern scholars, scholar activists, and also of the so-called subaltern or non-mainstream scholars. We need to recognize that knowledge can be conducted beyond the dominant Anglo-Saxon scholarship, critically analyzing how different sorts of inequalities influence also the global creation and dissemination of research and education. It also means, in my view, intellectual decolonization, drawing from scholarship around the world and giving spaces for theories and ideas from Global South scholars. It means a shift in teaching and research toward conditions where strong institutional positions address racial hierarchies, discrimination, and inequalities in teaching and research. and support for more equitable collaborations. There should also be much wider discussion of what knowledge means. We should also recognize that Southern perspectives have at least as long history as Northern perspectives. But I also want to raise or emphasize here that it's very essentialistic to say who is a scholar from Global South and who is a scholar from Global North, or at least to define who are the 100% Northern or Southern scholars. I point out this matter for one reason, which is a little bit sensitive, but I think it's important to raise here. There are two issues here. First one is that I hear so many students here in Finland, in Europe, in the United States, students who come from the Global South, and they tell me that I would like to do some research in your country and try to understand the inequalities and injustices there. And they always get the recommendation that, why don't you do research in your own country, because you know that one much better. So as if they are not allowed to make research on us. And I think that it shouldn't be so. But the other point in this matter is that I also hear many students saying from the Global North, having huge ethical dilemmas and saying that I cannot go to carry out research in the Global South because I'm so privileged and I cannot understand their struggles and their concerns because I'm from the Global North. And I think that can be a huge problem too, because then it can more like create divides rather than unite us in global development studies. So in my view, we should learn from each other and co-create knowledge. And for this reason, I still want to emphasize that it's important also to do empirical research wherever you do it. I myself do much ethnographic research still today, and I really enjoy it. But it's also important to, I think, doing ethnographic research or empirical research wherever you do it, it's important for not just considering the official interpretations of the world. We need to listen and reflect the lives of people erased from dominant narratives and arenas of influence. Try to understand how both conflict and connection and repression and resilience are part of people's lives in many parts of the world. I want to end this comment with a poem of Eduardo Galeano, a very famous Uruguayan writer, which recalls us that it is important to try to understand the untold history of the world made by those who are unseen, unheard, and forgotten, rather than focusing on grand narratives of development, modernity, and progress. So here is the poem, first in Spanish and then in English. Los espejos están llenos de gente. Los invisibles nos ven. Los olvidados nos recuerdan. Cuando nos vemos, los vemos. Cuando nos vamos, se van. Then in English. Mirrors are filled with people. The invisible see us. The forgotten recall us. When we see ourselves, we see them. When we turn away, do they. Many thanks.
Thank you, Anja. Very powerful. Alfredo, what is your view on how to do development studies from your point of view, but also maybe a little bit wider from European perspective.
Thank you. And thank you, Anja, for a very important and powerful statement. I think there's an analytical part of the answer and there's an ethical part of the answer. The ethical part is that development, because of its sensitivity, development studies has to be concerned with social inclusion, with equality, with social protection, as opposed to the validation of inequality, exclusion, paternalism, racism. This is a personal commitment, a personal engagement of the great majority of people involved in development studies and development research. And then there's the analytical part, the application of those principles into the work that we all do. And that is about the avoidance of essentialism. There's nothing magical or spiritual about being in the Global South or being from the Global South or listening to perspectives from the Global South. That is important, but it has to be gauged against and measured against those ethical commitments that I mentioned before, as opposed to simply geographical origin. There's a recognition of heterogeneity within the South and within the North, not just between South and North. It is about recognition of differential histories between North and South, and what is it that constitutes those separate areas of the world. It's about recognizing social structures now and in the past. It's about recognizing political and economic structures that are different there, and how can we discuss those social, economic, and political structures in the light of historical experiences, and as academics, as social scientists, use our own vantage points of being able to read, being able to talk to people all over the world, being able to circulate all over the world, being able to bring ideas into cross-fertilization, bring experiences into common knowledge, use our vantage point to bring forward those ethical commitments and promote ideas of equality, promote ideas of social inclusion, of citizenship, and of universality. We need to recognize that neoliberalism, financialization, globalization, they have created wealth in particular points and areas and for certain social sectors in the world, in the North and in the South. They have also created new patterns of poverty and inequality in the North and in the South. And if we as social scientists and as development scholars, if we can give a contribution to bringing those inequalities and those perverse dynamics to the forefront of debate, and if we can circulate ideas about how to confront those inequalities in a progressive direction, in a direction of inclusion and democracy, I think that is an excellent job that we will be doing. We can't resolve the problems of the world, absolutely not, but we can play a very small part as citizens in those broad movements that are now, I think, more necessary than ever to confront the advance of the far right and to bring forward alternatives, concrete alternatives for development studies and for political life in the North and in the South at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. Just looking at the time, I would then pose my last question about the hope. And then I would like everyone to think that if you have a comment, one comment to one of your peer panelists after that, or one kind of further question, then we go round about that, and then we will have the comment. But I think it's what is important to hear from you, because you're kind of all very experienced and established development researchers, is at this point of time and with the kind of title we have for the conference about the ruins and cracks and hope, and we have a lot of also young emerging scholars in development studies in the room and online, I guess. So do we have hope? and where the cracks of hope are to be found. Is anybody want to start? Okay, David, please.
Do we have hope? Of course. The reason we have hope is because there are many peoples around the world who have realized that development isn't there on their menu. The reason we have hope is because there are many peoples around the world. And when I'm talking about many peoples, I'm talking about hundreds of millions. I'm talking about the people who live in the 1/3 of the planet, on the 1/3 of the planet, who are trying to conserve, to protect their territories, and who are trying to build self-sufficient communities that don't depend upon the market. They're trying to protect themselves against the inroads of the market. But what I'm talking about also are peoples who are not individuals fighting for an existence, scratching out a meager few cents on the euro. I'm talking about people who are working together to make sure that in their communities there is no poverty, to make sure that in their communities, those of us who are over 80 years old still have things to contribute to our communities. I'm talking about people who make sure that the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, and maybe even the 2-year-olds are also contributing to community welfare. Because when they do the voluntary work that is part of the tradition of community organization in their communities, they're learning that working together is much better than working alone. So yes, there is hope. The hope is hard. Some of you have probably heard of the Zapatista Army for National Liberation in Mexico that is celebrating 32 years of struggles against the Mexican state and now against criminal elements in the world, what's it called, the world narcotics trade. But in spite of that, 500,000 people associated with the Zapatista movement have, over the past more than a quarter century, learned that women are the same as men and have the same rights and obligations as men. That means that women are in the ranks of the army, but it also means that women are in the ranks of the teachers, like the men. And in this process, within the jungles of Chiapas, they have the forests. They have reconstructed the ability to provide for their food. And they have resuscitated the extraordinary prowess of a variety of bees called stingless bees, meliponas, which provide
a honey of it with extraordinary curative processes. I could go on. I won't.
Okay.
Thank
you.
but we have a real people in the depths of the Amazon, in the far reaches of the Antarctic. The Mapuches are surviving in spite of the governments of Argentina and Brazil. Ubuntu is becoming a different kind of cry than it was in the 1960s. I urge you to understand what the relationship is between Ubuntu in Africa and Buen Vivir in Latin America, and the so many other forms that it's called, Kumaksasai, Lehi, Kushkalekal, Swarak, because those are the cries of hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'm sure that we could continue on listening to you for hours, but now for the sake, no, thank you, very powerful. Sake of time, keep a little bit briefer. The hope. Anja, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you so much, David. I will go for a little bit more practical issues. You were asking us also what would we say for young students. So first the question that are we in the ruins? I think this is the question that has been posed us as development studies scholars for decades. We also need to recognize what has been built. I was so surprised when I read that there are postgraduate courses covered over 130 universities around the world in development studies, and at least 32, at least in half of them are in the global south. In Finland, we need to recognize, as Kalle and Ulla-Maja were saying, where did it start? And now we have teaching at all levels at the University of Helsinki, from bachelor level till doctoral level, and quite a lot of research going on. So I do not see development studies in the ruins. And I think we need to have hope in the ruins. In the current turbulent world situation, we are needed more than ever. I also want to say for students that there is not just a single box in development studies in which you have to fit. There is a diversity of intellectual and institutional landscapes to find your own home. Excellent research almost always gets funding. It's also important to remember that excellent research is very rarely carried out only in the spotlight. It is often constructed through strong passion, commitment, and hard work at the edges. So I think we have much influence on research, on higher education, and we also have huge societal impact. Not necessarily in all the cabinets and corners, but we have our expertises and experiences of which we can be confident and even proud of. We just need to go forward despite all the turbulences and not to lose our passion, commitment, and inspiration. Thanks.
Thank you. In this point, I would like to ask Alfredo if you have any message of hope to our young scholars in the room.
Yes, of course. And I think hope is about solidarity. And we see examples of solidarity and hope in practice. We see that in Minneapolis, wonderful, also in the global north, and we need to look at what is not always on television. The water movements in South Africa, the organizations in the favelas in Brazil, the Kurdish activists in Turkey and in Syria, the Palestinian solidarity activists who are in political prison in the UK, the activists against genocide all over the world, the environmental movements that are coming up everywhere. I think hope is of the essence, and hope is based on a realistic politics of activism for causes that are important and that are feasible and that point to a way forward concretely to communities, not just a politics of negativity and of rejection of the present rejection of neoliberalism. That is very important, but it's also important to point to positive examples and a positive program of transformation based on bringing people together, based on solidarity, on universality, on the commonalities that bring us together, and then act on the basis of that hope. So I am very optimistic. We are in a better position than we were 5 or 10 years ago. The challenges that we have in terms of wars and environmental disasters and strategic challenges affecting particularly countries in the West, these challenges are very, very difficult, very, very strong, but we have the energy, and if we have the determination to act on that, I believe we can succeed.
Eleanor?
Yes, thank you very much. I also would like to pick up on the question of hope in relation to emerging scholars of development research. Sometimes I'm a mother of a 20-year-old, and sometimes I feel that people need to give me hope as she negotiates this way under vast burdens of debt and unemployment. And I was talking to one of our scholars yesterday who's sitting in the room now and is visiting from Uganda in terms of a message of hope. And he gave me hope. And I'd like to just repeat actually what he told me, which is, yes, there is hope. A journey starts with the first step, and this is education. And across the African continent being the area that I'm working in, educational provision has expanded and people are understanding and seeing the value of education. And there are opportunities coming up. And I thank you for that message because I've heard yesterday, for example, excellent presentations by PhD students in this room. I read many proposals for excellent research. And I think my message to you would be know the tools of your trade, particularly in terms of critical analysis within development, research and social science. Embrace new innovations, but also remain true to yourselves and advance equity and fairness in the relationships that you have within your field of work. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So very kind of positive messages to all of us. Thank you. So let's keep the flag going on. I mean, what you started a long time ago. So that's our duty. Now we have a quick round. Any one of the panelists, if you want to comment, and peer panelists, if you want to, clarify, disagree. One point, unfortunately, we cannot have much of the discussion, but select one point and one of your peer commentators, if you remember. If you don't remember who said it, just say the argument. And we go round of these comments before we have our general commentator coming up. Alfredo, do you have any comments that you could start?
the only thing I would like to say is that this has been a wonderful panel, and I think all the contributions converged very, very strongly around common themes, and I could see no disagreement of any significance between us. There was different angles, but all building up towards very similar conclusions. So I'm super happy to be part of this panel.
Thank you, and thank you for being part of us. Okay, Eleanor?
I think maybe it's an observation of food for thought that I'm taking away from this panel. Actually, lots of excellent reflections and points from everyone, which I really appreciate. There is one food of thought that I'm taking away from David's presentation, which is we've seen a future which is based within community-based agrarian transformation. And within my day job, a lot of the time, working on the African continent, I hear about the many, I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but what percentage of people by the year 2050 will be youth from Africa within urban areas. And I'm thinking about this disjunction between this community-based agrarian world and the other world that I hear about, related to youth, related to urbanization, and related to change that is taking place in different parts of the world. It's just my food for thought. I need to go away and think about it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. Anja, any?
I have the same feeling as Alfredo. I think these are complicated questions and there can be different views, but still we had many, many commonalities. What I want to raise here is that what I feel a little bit lacking is that I would love to hear also from young scholars and from students of their thoughts, their future aspirations, their scenarios, because it might be that my views are already out of date and somehow institutionalized. So we want to hear new ideas and new spirits.
Thank you. David, any comments to what has been discussed? One comment.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here, to be here, to listen to your work, but also because coming here today, being in part of this event, is giving me the opportunity also to visit one of the territories of life here in Finland, up in the Arctic Circle. It's called Snow Change, and I look forward to. It's been active for more than 20 years here in Finland, and I'm looking forward very, very much to seeing how they have managed over more than a quarter of a century to rehabilitate parts of the Arctic Sea that now is a source of well-being for them and enriching the environment. So I thank you for being here and allowing and giving me the opportunity to going up to the Northeast.
Thank you, and thank you all the panelists. We continue now the discussion, first with the discussant and then with the audience, and I really hope we will get those views from younger scholars as Anja hoped in the discussion. But now I would like to invite Professor Emeritus Barry Gills from the Global Development Studies in Helsinki University.
Hope, like truth, is made real by action, and historically by collective action. Now, we live in a time of rupture, of disruption, of destabilization of what was assumed to be an order. And that has been, we have to face the times we live in as a discipline and as individuals. And we, as humanity, face probably in global history unprecedented existential threats. Several. And they are real. They are imminent. And we must face it. And so, what does that mean? We've had such an enriching conversation. I don't need to repeat any of the points said. So what I can contribute is that, and now is the time to reflect again on ourselves, on our highest values and aspirations and motivations. Why did we enter this field? Why are we pursuing what we call development research? And to renew our courage and commitment, inspiration and hard work in order to engage with this world, this condition in which we find ourselves. We do have a very important role, as has been said. We are not irrelevant, we are very relevant as a field of knowledge, as a field of community of sharing of knowledge and co-construction of knowledge, and the education that we engage with so many. This contestation of ideas is our great contribution and our great burden and responsibility. And it takes, now I'm saying, to renew our desire and our willingness to be bold, to be radical, to challenge the narratives of domination with counter narratives of liberation once again. So the late theorist of underdevelopment and dependency, Andre Gunder Frank, in 1972 published an essay called "Dependence is Dead. Long live dependence and the class struggle." What did he mean? I will transpose it right now to say development is dead. Long live development and the global social struggle for existence. Well, what does that mean? Development as some universalist single paradigm of the road to progress and happiness and dignity and prosperity is dead. But it is also, in reality, in the material reality of the world, intensely practiced in the name of development all over the world. And the class struggles and social struggles of masses of people are very real, and they are intensifying, and they will intensify even more. And so our role is to be with them, to analyze it and to practice it collectively with them. So I'll just leave you with that. Development is dead. Long live development and the global social struggle for existence.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. And now it's time to open the discussion. You can have a comment or a question, but if you have a question, please address to it one of our panelists. And when you ask your question or give your comment, please introduce yourself first. Okay, here's one. Two.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Florencia Quesada Vendaño. I'm a professor in Latin American Studies at the University of Helsinki, and I'm thrilled to be more here. Okay, I am thrilled to be have heard the historical part of development studies at the beginning. It's really important, I think, to remember those origins. I'm a historian by training, so for me, it's fundamental history. So thank you very much for and it's great that those pioneers were invited here to have a voice for the talking about the voiceless. And also, I think it's really important, these meetings, because there are few meetings like this in general terms in Finland. But that was just my comments, and thank you for also your contributions. But thinking about these very artificial divisions of Global South and North, and even thinking about that very critical concept of Global South, which I don't like personally speaking, I would like to address or ask why there were not more Southern voices here present in this panel. I'm talking about people from whatever that Global South, Africa or Latin America, why they were not given a voice here to come and express their feelings. And also I'm thinking about these divisions. I've worked in development studies for many years, but now I'm located in the Faculty of Humanities. And it's very interesting. I've been very recently appointed here, and I'm trying to think how different ways how can we collaborate, and if what type of work do I have to do now, because I'm in the Department of Cultures. So, but we do a lot of development, as Barry said very well. Development is dead. I agree as well on that. Maybe the whole development days activities should be renamed as well. But how can we collaborate more within African and Latin American fields as well, and these big divisions? And well, many other questions I have, but thank you very much for your contributions in any case.
Thank you very much. So we can take the second one. Kari.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all the speakers today. Yes, today my name is Kari Mattila. I had graduated as a doctor of development studies then in 2010 or 11, but have been involved in leading human rights organizations both in Finland and globally for the past 15 years. But sort of trying to see what's going on here, back here after many, many years. So very interesting to be here. And obviously my kind of, from this experience and perspective, I have also kind of looked at the hope question. So thanks everyone of the panelists for sort of saying that hope is there. Of course, this crowd, as always, goes for the action question. And my sort of uneasiness here is that I think this analytical crowd that we are should probably be a bit more clear whether we talk about action for ourselves, which I think the neighbor here also talked about, and Anja Nygren as well. So I think that's really or should be our concern. I'm referring to me as well now as a researcher, because others take care of the action elsewhere. It's sometimes difficult to separate these fields, I know, because many researchers across the globe are both activists here and there. But really, like, researchers would not be the ones standing in front of the ICC or, you know, pushing governments at the UN debates or making UPRs here and there. So I think our focus here is whether there is hope for development studies and what that should be all about. As said, it's difficult to separate these, but because we are facing existential threats, not just for the global justice, for environment, democracy, but also for this field of study. So I guess at least some of the questions that Florencia raised here are pertinent. That would be the defining processes. You all talked about it, but I think it's a good momentum to really get on board and not wait for others to start redefining the essential or crucial concepts, not just development, but as said, Global South and North. Because as Rockbell Bailey said yesterday, I like that part very much, where she said, our essence is the words. So researchers know how to define concepts, redefine, and it takes years. So just as a suggestion, engage everyone, both also researchers, but also students, in practicing how do we redefine concepts. I don't know how much that is being taught currently in different universities, but I would really engage students from everywhere and engage seriously what should Global South and North, how do we get rid of those concepts ultimately, because of course they are colonial and neocolonial. So if we don't find new concepts, others will, and they may not work for the best of the, global, any part of the world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a third question from Roundtable.
Thank you, Roundtable, Nijay Paley, London School of Economics. So I just have two very brief comments. The first is, we've been talking a lot about alternatives throughout the past couple of days, and I wonder what the panelists have to say about doing away with the term Global South. I always say so-called as a qualifier, and using the term global majority instead. So that's the kind of first intervention. The second intervention is what I find to be quite troubling, whether in the scholarship of development or the policies of development, or even the practice of development, is a lack of real radical humility. I think a lot of us come in with hubris and not humility. I think a lot of us come in, whether we're studying in the so-called North or South, with a sense of contempt and not collaboration. And so my message of hope to all of us in this room and beyond this room is what we need to be doing is practicing a politics of radical humility. So that's what I would say we need to leave with in terms of this idea of dignity.
Thank you. There was one more question here, very brief, and I have the unfortunate responsibility to make sure that everyone gets their lunch as well. So after this question, I will ask the panelists to address some of the questions, one question by one panelist.
Yes, thank you. Maybe for Barry, if development is dead, is it really? Is it time to close the casket or to do some CPR? I don't know. And to Anja, I would like to ask about the identity of the discipline. With so much research now done on like environmental issues and so forth, what kind of identity do you see as that can be communicated to outside, to future students and maybe our undergrad students and so forth? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a, sorry, we have now 2 minutes to the end, so we need to be we can kind of have a few minutes over. Yeah, for Anja, that was very clear question for you. Would you like to start answering about the identity?
Yes, as I said, I don't want to put us in a box. So I prefer a certain kind of diversity, but we also need an identity. But what I would like to say is that environmental issues are not something that we can get rid of no more. So environment, politics, society, they are so interwoven that even if you're not studying environmental issues as such, somehow they need to be taken into account. I think our identity is quite diverse, but of course we have priorities in certain areas based on research funding and based on our curriculum. Of course, we can renovate our curriculum after each 4 years. So I invite people to participate actively what kind of curriculum we will have after 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Then there were a few questions that were not addressed to anyone particular, so I think, Alfredo, could you go for the conceptualization and the question about the kind of responsibility for development studies to create those new concepts and conceptualizations? And there were the suggestion, for example, of global majority instead of global south and radical humility. So what is your take about the possibility of development research to provide new conceptualization and the responsibility of it?
Thank you. I don't want to get hung up on terminology. It used to be third world and all the periphery, developing economies. Emerging markets is just ridiculous. Let's drop that one. But global south, global majority, yeah, fine, whatever. What I want to focus on and what I think development studies ought to focus on is not the wording. It is the social structures, the economic structures, the political structures that drive the separation between different areas of the world, and then the separation within those different areas, within countries and within regions. I want to focus on the dynamics that create heterogeneity as opposed to the naming of those heterogeneities. Can we create new concepts? Of course, we're academics. Academics are paid to create new concepts. But what, again, is important is that those concepts reflect actual realities and resonate with people doing things on the ground. I want to stress this very, very strongly. We need, and we are in a privileged position as social scientists and as development studies scholars, we are in a privileged position to bring together those studies that are being made all over the world with movements that are transforming the world, and the cross-fertilization between the two is extremely important at this moment in time. Yes, humility is very, very central in all this, because we as academics, we cannot change the world, but we can assist, we can support, we can engage with movements that are actually doing that on the ground in the global north, and I realize many colleagues here don't like the terminology, and in the global south as well. In all parts of the world, the important thing is the engagement, not the wording. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then there was a question of the divisions and the kind of the humanities, social sciences, and different. We kind of, I think, understand the development studies is very multidisciplinary. I don't know, Eleanor, in Nordic Africa Institute, you have people from very different disciplines. So what is your recipe for kind of this kind of multidisciplinary collaboration?
Thank you. One of the things that is important to me and remains important to me is the centering of social science within, even when one is working across disciplines and critical social sciences. So although we, yes, work with other disciplines in a variety of configurations, it is what social science brings to the table, I think, and we don't have time to, but to me, that remains absolutely integral to what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think the last question to David about the action. Whose action are we talking about?
People around the world are involved right now in protecting their territories, in trying to involve a process of not only keeping people out, but making life better for all of us. And the extraordinary experiences that the many peoples around the world are involved in right now, it seems to me to be the subject, this variety of strategies, this variety of understandings of the way the world is, and the extraordinary generosity of the planet to allow us to be here at this moment is something that I think that we should pay attention to in what is called development studies or Latin American studies or things like that. If you look at the contributions of those writers from these communities who have expressed the way in which the richness of the world has allowed their communities to still be here, in spite of history, the extraordinary potential for those communities to teach us what we might be able to learn about not following the true and tried paths of the elites of today's world, and instead try to understand the diversity of the foot soldiers that have been saving, that continue to save the planet. I think that that's what I would take away from my studies.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, now I think we need to close, and maybe Barry and Ilmari, you can have the discussion about debt of development during the lunch, as well as the question about why don't we have more Global South voices in the panel. I think none of us knows the answer. Maybe then the organizers can discuss that also during the break. I would like to give huge thanks to all the panelists for the interesting and very engaging discussion. And we could go on the discussion now for another hour, but we also need to be in time for the next session. So thank you very much.